You think you know her story, but you don't, Charlotte Emerson whispered to herself as she adjusted the emerald silk of her gown, the fabric catching the golden light of the chandelier like liquid jewels. The gala hall stretched before her, a river of tailored tuxedos and shimmering gowns, every step of hers echoing faintly against the marble floors. Her heels clicked deliberately, a steady rhythm against the soft murmur of champagne glasses clinking and polite laughter floating in the warm air. Charlotte's gaze swept the room, taking in the glittering guests, the towering floral arrangements, and the glint of crystal chandeliers above, but it was Ethan Caldwell she was seeking. Across the ballroom, he moved with effortless charm, arm casually draped around Vivienne Leroux, her crimson dress a stark slash of color against the subdued elegance of the gala. The sight tightened Charlotte's chest, memories flashing, whispered promises broken, nights spent waiting for apologies that never came, the quiet humiliation of being replaced. Her pulse raced, a fierce flutter of old pain colliding with the simmering determination she had nurtured over months of rebuilding her life. She drew in a steadying breath, inhaling the scent of sandalwood and fresh linen, letting it anchor her to the present. Each step toward the center of the room felt measured, a blend of grace and quiet defiance, heels striking the polished floor with authority. Conversations around her faded into a soft blur as her mind rehearsed every detail of her plan, the knowledge that she was no longer the woman he dismissed so easily. Charlotte's eyes flicked to the staircase where the gala spotlight pooled like liquid gold, illuminating the path she would take, and she imagined the ripple of surprise when her presence was recognized. She remembered the countless hours spent in quiet triumph, the gallery she had acquired, the investment partnerships secured, the independence she had forged from ashes. Now all of that was invisible power she carried with poise, hidden in the arch of her back, the tilt of her chin, the subtle curve of her lips that hinted at secrets only she knew. As she drew closer, Charlotte caught the first few glances, fleeting but sharp, the curious eyes of socialites and the subtle shift in murmurs, a silent acknowledgement of her transformation. The soft clink of ice against crystal, the faint hum of a piano in the corner, and the gentle flicker of candlelight created a symphony of sensory details that grounded her as she approached, each heartbeat a drum of both anticipation and control. And then, just a few feet away, the faintest crease of recognition crossed Ethan's brow, a spark that told her the evening had already begun, though the full revelation had yet to unfold. Charlotte Emerson paused at the edge of the crowd, letting the weight of her presence settle before stepping further into the glittering expanse of the ballroom. The soft hum of conversation and the gentle clatter of silverware formed a backdrop to the rapid pulse of her heartbeat, each thump a reminder of the meticulous preparation that had led her here. She could feel the polished marble beneath her heels, the faint coolness grounding her as she navigated the delicate lattice of tables and guests. Her eyes briefly caught the reflection of her own figure in a tall, gilded mirror, the sapphire blue of her eyes mirroring the resolve in her expression, a quiet testament to the months of rebuilding, of claiming control over a life once disrupted. With every step, Charlotte felt the familiar rush of triumph mingling with anticipation, a delicate tension that sharpened her focus. She had rehearsed the conversations, anticipated the glances, and yet the subtle currents of the gala remained unpredictable, a river she had to navigate with both grace and precision. As she approached a cluster of attendees engaged in polite laughter, she offered smiles that were carefully measured, projecting warmth while concealing the strategic awareness that hummed beneath her calm exterior. Each exchange of pleasantries reinforced the reality that she was no longer the woman whose confidence had been diminished, but someone who had mastered the art of understated authority. A soft murmur passed through the room, the subtle recognition of someone whose presence demanded attention without overt display, and Charlotte felt a surge of satisfaction. She allowed herself a brief glance toward Ethan Caldwell, noting the slight stiffening of his posture, the subtle narrowing of his eyes as he registered her proximity. Vivienne Leroux, radiant in her crimson gown, leaned lightly into Ethan, unaware of the silent recalibration occurring in his awareness. Charlotte drew in a steadying breath, the mingled scents of champagne, fresh orchids, and polished wood filling her senses, grounding her as she advanced. Her internal monologue traced the steps she had taken since the separation, the gallery acquisition, the careful cultivation of high-profile connections, the relentless pursuit of knowledge and refinement. This was the armor she now wore, invisible to all but her, yet profoundly impactful in every interaction. The music shifted to a slow, lilting waltz, the soft sweep of violins creating a cadence that matched the rhythm of her measured steps. She moved with a grace that commanded attention without seeking it, aware of the subtle shifts in the air around her. Guests turned briefly in acknowledgement, whispers of admiration blending seamlessly with the ongoing social dance, an unseen tide carrying her forward. Charlotte's gaze flicked again to Ethan, a quiet confidence emanating from her, the knowledge that she now held a sphere of influence and power that he could not anticipate. Each moment felt suspended, the anticipation coiling in the room, as she navigated the social landscape with both elegance and unspoken authority. In these fleeting seconds, the ballroom transformed into a stage, and Charlotte Emerson, in her poised stride and unwavering focus, was both actor and director of a performance that promised revelations yet to unfold. Charlotte Emerson reached the center of the ballroom, and the soft murmur of conversation seemed to dim around her, as if the chandeliers themselves had lowered to frame her presence. The golden light kissed the contours of her gown, casting reflections across the polished marble that mirrored the quiet authority in her posture. Guests instinctively turned to watch, the subtle recognition of someone who carried both refinement and unseen power rippling through the room. Charlotte's eyes met Ethan Caldwell's, and for the first time that evening, the confident mask he wore faltered, a flicker of surprise crossing his features as he registered her composed elegance. Vivian Leroux, previously radiant and commanding, now shifted subtly, her posture betraying a hint of unease as the subtle currents of the room acknowledged Charlotte's arrival. A discreet figure at the edge of the room, a renowned investor with an impeccable reputation, subtly stepped forward, linking arms with Charlotte for a brief introduction, whispering her influence and achievements to those nearby, the announcement unseen but palpably altering the room's dynamics. Every glance she received carried an unspoken recognition. Charlotte Emerson was no longer the woman defined by the past. She was a force defined by accomplishment, poise, and carefully cultivated presence. The soft strains of the string quartet rose and fell, accentuating each deliberate step she took, and she allowed herself a quiet inhale, letting the scents of polished wood, blooming roses, and sparkling champagne ground her as she advanced. Ethan's gaze wavered, his confidence shaking as the subtle authority of her stance and the whispered acknowledgments of those around him shifted the balance. Charlotte's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, calm yet piercing, her every movement a calculated demonstration of self-possession. The room seemed to pulse with anticipation, each guest sensing the change, the invisible aura of power and influence Charlotte carried. Conversations faltered, whispers replaced laughter, and the social choreography of the gala shifted to accommodate her silent command. She passed gracefully by the central display of crystal and flowers, nodding politely at those who recognized her significance, each motion a testament to control and refinement. And as she stopped near the grand staircase, her eyes subtly scanning the room, a hint of recognition from a distant observer suggested that the next revelation of her status and authority would be acknowledged in full, leaving the audience in suspense, poised for the unfolding drama that promised to redefine the evening and leave all present re-examining the true measure of Charlotte Emerson's presence. Charlotte Emerson felt the soft weight of anticipation settle in the ballroom as she moved closer to the center of attention, her steps measured, each heel clicking against the polished marble like a metronome setting the pace of the evening. The glow of crystal chandeliers reflected off her gown, accentuating the deep emerald silk and the subtle shimmer that hinted at her meticulous preparation. Guests paused mid-conversation, their murmurs hushed as eyes turned, drawn to the quiet authority she radiated. Charlotte allowed her gaze to sweep the room, noting subtle shifts, a whisper exchanged between socialites, a slight hesitation in the staff as they adjusted to her presence, and the almost imperceptible tightening of Ethan Caldwell's jaw as he recognized the woman before him was no longer the same person he had underestimated. She navigated the crowd with graceful assurance, nodding politely to those who acknowledged her, while internally cataloging each glance, each micro-expression, a silent testament to her strategic awareness. The soft strains of the string quartet rose in a lilting melody, matching the rhythm of her measured advance, the air thick with the subtle aroma of fresh orchids, and polished wood mingling with champagne and whispered conversations. Charlotte paused briefly near the grand staircase, the room's architecture framing her like a portrait in motion, and allowed herself a private, controlled exhale, savoring the calm authority that had been cultivated through months of quiet effort and deliberate planning. Her mind traced the path that had led here, the gallery she had acquired, the high-profile partnerships she had secured, the public and private victories that no one in the room yet understood. She smiled faintly, not at any one person, but at the invisible recognition of her transformation, the shift in the room's atmosphere that acknowledged her presence and implied a story that was only beginning to be understood. Ethan's eyes flickered toward her again, a flash of uncertainty crossing his confident facade, while Vivian Leroux's composure subtly wavered, her previously commanding posture now slightly constrained by the growing awareness of Charlotte's influence. Each step Charlotte took was deliberate, a choreography of elegance and quiet assertion, her movements weaving through the space in a manner that commanded attention without overt display. As she approached a cluster of influential attendees, a well-timed introduction from an associate she had cultivated silently over the months lent her further credibility, a nod to the power she now wielded discreetly yet unmistakably. Charlotte's eyes lingered briefly on Ethan, her internal calculation precise, understanding fully the subtle shift her presence had already caused, and yet she maintained an outward calm, the poised smile and measured gaze projecting unshakable confidence. The room, once filled with casual chatter and flowing laughter, now seemed to move around her as if she were the axis of its social gravity, the air charged with anticipation for what was yet to be revealed, the audience of guests quietly aware that the evening's dynamics had irrevocably shifted under the subtle, controlled influence of Charlotte Emerson's commanding presence. Charlotte Emerson finally paused near the grand piano, the soft golden light cascading over her shoulders and the elegant sweep of her gown, making her appear as though she had stepped from a dream into the tangible world of the gala. Every guest nearby instinctively shifted, their hushed whispers barely audible over the gentle cadence of the string quartet, yet they carried the weight of recognition, the subtle acknowledgement that someone extraordinary had arrived. She allowed her eyes to scan the room once more, taking in the delicate interplay of polished champagne flutes, the glint of diamonds, and the poised figures of socialites who had long set the standards of refinement. Ethan Caldwell stood just a few tables away, a flicker of hesitation crossing his usually confident expression as he followed her with his gaze, sensing without understanding that the balance of the evening had quietly shifted. Vivian Leroux, radiant in her crimson gown, instinctively straightened, a subtle tightening of her posture betraying the unspoken realization that Charlotte's presence carried both history and authority, a combination that could not be ignored. Charlotte moved with deliberate grace, each step a demonstration of poise and purpose, heels clicking softly against the marble, her hands lightly touching the folds of her gown to ensure perfect composure. She acknowledged familiar faces with subtle nods, her calm demeanor contrasting with the charged undercurrent she sensed in the room, a quiet control that shifted the attention and curiosity of all who watched. The murmurs of speculation grew, delicate yet undeniable, as she approached the center of the ballroom where the spotlight pooled, casting her in a warm halo of light, her emerald gown catching glimmers from the crystal chandeliers above. Charlotte's mind raced quietly, cataloging the subtle expressions and postures of those around her, noting the social dynamics and silent acknowledgments of her power and influence. She remembered the countless hours of preparation, the painstaking steps taken to rebuild her reputation, her independence, and her network of allies, all of which converged in this singular moment of poised revelation. The music swelled slightly, and she let her presence fill the space without a word, allowing the audience of guests, observers, and even Ethan and Vivian to register the extent of her transformation. Charlotte's lips curved into a small, confident smile, not directed at anyone, but carrying the weight of unspoken victories and the quiet authority she now wielded. Her eyes met Ethan's again for just a heartbeat, and the subtle shift in his expression, uncertainty, recognition, the first hint of admiration, affirmed that her return was complete, a silent statement of triumph that promised more revelations yet to come. As she allowed herself a final glance across the room, she noticed the almost imperceptible nods and fleeting glances from powerful figures nearby, a confirmation that the evening's course had already been quietly, irrevocably altered by her calculated, graceful entrance, leaving the audience anticipating the moments yet to unfold in this charged, glittering world. Charlotte Emerson allowed herself a subtle pause near the edge of the marble staircase, the soft glow of the chandeliers highlighting the contours of her gown and the poised confidence she carried effortlessly. Each flicker of candlelight and sparkle from crystal glasses seemed to frame her in a delicate yet commanding aura, a silent signal that she was not merely present, but had arrived with purpose and authority. The gentle hum of conversations continued, yet her presence created a magnetic pull, drawing glances, whispered remarks, and the faint rustle of silk as guests subtly shifted to observe her. Charlotte's eyes swept methodically across the ballroom, noting the expressions of those she had once known, the subtle tension in the posture of socialites who had prided themselves on navigating the hierarchy, and the brief tightening of Ethan Caldwell's jaw as recognition and disbelief mingled in his gaze. She let her gaze linger on him for a heartbeat, measuring the impact of her entrance, before allowing it to drift across Vivian Leroux, whose confident smile had momentarily faltered, betraying awareness of the quiet power Charlotte exuded. Every step Charlotte took was deliberate, calculated to assert presence without demanding attention, the click of her heels against polished marble marking the rhythm of her composure and control. She allowed herself a soft inhale, the scent of fresh orchids and polished wood mingling with the faint effervescence of champagne, anchoring her in the moment as the undercurrent of anticipation rippled subtly through the guests around her. A distant murmur of acknowledgement reached her ears, the kind of brief recognition that carried the weight of unspoken respect and subtle envy, signaling that her strategic positioning and silent influence had begun to shift the social dynamics of the evening. Charlotte's mind traced the careful steps she had taken over months, the meticulous planning and preparation that had rebuilt her reputation, expanded her influence, and strengthened her independence. With each controlled motion, each measured smile and nod, she projected an air of calm authority that belied the intricate network of alliances, achievements, and quiet victories she carried invisibly beneath the surface. As she approached a table where influential figures had gathered, a brief introduction and acknowledgement of her accomplishments served to further solidify her presence, quietly reinforcing the power and credibility she now commanded. Charlotte's eyes met Ethan's once more, and in that fleeting moment, she understood the subtle but profound effect her reemergence had already created, his confident demeanor now tempered with an unmistakable tension. The room seemed to adjust around her, a gravitational shift of attention and acknowledgement that spoke to the culmination of her strategic efforts and quiet triumphs. Guests unconsciously oriented themselves to the cadence of her movement, the subtle sway of her gown, and the controlled radiance of her presence, each element reinforcing the awareness that Charlotte Emerson's return had irrevocably altered the landscape of the evening, leaving all who observed poised on the precipice of revelation, waiting for the next moment of subtle yet undeniable power to unfold. Charlotte Emerson drifted closer to the center of the ballroom, her movements seamless, each step a quiet assertion of authority and poise. The golden light of the chandeliers glinted off the folds of her gown, casting subtle reflections across the marble floor, while the soft strains of the string quartet seemed to synchronize with the rhythm of her controlled heartbeat. Guests instinctively turned, their murmurs fading into near silence as they registered her presence, the room subtly bending to the gravity of her quiet confidence. Ethan Caldwell's eyes followed her every motion, a flicker of disbelief and tension crossing his usually composed face, While Vivian Leroux's smile tightened, the awareness of Charlotte's newfound influence manifesting in the subtlest shifts of posture and expression. Charlotte allowed herself a soft, deliberate exhale, the scent of polished wood and fresh orchids filling her senses and grounding her in the moment, reinforcing the calm authority she projected effortlessly. She navigated toward a cluster of influential attendees, exchanging measured nods and polite smiles, each interaction underscoring the mastery she now wielded over the social landscape. The subtle acknowledgments from guests, fleeting glances and whispered comments, signaled recognition of her achievements, her independence, and the quiet power she carried, invisible yet undeniable. Charlotte's eyes briefly met Ethan's once more, a silent understanding passing between them, a recognition of the shift in balance that was now unmistakable. She let her gaze wander, noting the ripple effect her presence had caused, the soft adjustments in conversation, the minor hesitations and attentive stares, all testament to the influence she had cultivated without overt declaration. Every step, every gesture, every calculated pause reinforced the aura of self-possession she radiated, a contrast to the past where she had been underestimated and overlooked. Charlotte's lips curved into a subtle, confident smile, a quiet celebration of her meticulous planning and the unseen victories that had led her to this moment. The soft clink of glasses, the whisper of silk, the gentle hum of music, and the ambient chatter formed a symphony that centered around her, amplifying the understated power she now commanded. She reached the midpoint of the ballroom, her posture erect, her head held high, projecting calm and authority, and yet beneath the surface, a surge of satisfaction and triumph coursed through her. The room, once flowing with the familiar rhythms of a high society gathering, now adjusted to her presence, the social dynamics subtly realigned by her quiet assertion. Every observer, from seasoned socialites to casual attendees, registered the nuanced display of influence, and the anticipation of what Charlotte would do next lent an electric tension to the air, a promise that the unfolding evening would reveal the full measure of her carefully cultivated position and the silent yet undeniable power she now possessed. Charlotte Emerson moved with deliberate grace through the center of the ballroom, her eyes scanning the crowd as the soft glow of chandeliers and golden light reflected off crystal glasses, casting a warm, almost ethereal hue across the polished marble floor. Each step she took was measured, the gentle click of her heels marking a rhythm that drew subtle attention without breaking her composure, and she felt the weight of expectation shift slightly around her, an invisible acknowledgement of her presence and the power she now carried. Conversations seemed to quiet momentarily as she passed, the hum of polite laughter and chatter blending with the soft strains of a string quartet, creating a rhythm that mirrored the calm determination in her chest. Charlotte allowed her gaze to rest briefly on Ethan Caldwell, noting the faint tightening of his jaw and the quickening of his pulse as he recognized the woman before him. The contrast between the confident, poised Charlotte and the man who had underestimated her years before strikingly evident. Vivian Leroux, in her crimson gown, attempted to maintain her radiant composure, yet Charlotte could see the subtle shift in her posture, the barely perceptible hesitation, as though the room itself had changed under Charlotte's quiet, commanding influence. The scent of fresh orchids and polished wood mingled with the gentle fizz of champagne and the soft aroma of silk, grounding Charlotte in the moment as she advanced, a measured confidence radiating with every movement. She acknowledged acquaintances with polite nods and brief, composed smiles, each gesture reinforcing the unspoken message that she now belonged to a world defined by accomplishment, influence, and strategic awareness. The subtle, almost imperceptible recognition from guests created a network of quiet power around her, whispers of admiration and fleeting glances carrying the weight of acknowledgement that Charlotte had meticulously cultivated through months of patient effort. As she approached a central table, her movements were both graceful and purposeful, the careful timing of her stride and the tilt of her chin projecting authority and quiet command, signaling to all present that she had arrived not only to participate, but to redefine the room's dynamic. Charlotte's eyes met Ethan's once more, a brief, measured contact that conveyed more than words ever could, a silent testament to the shift in balance and the culmination of her resilience and preparation. The ambient sounds of the gala, the gentle hum of voices, the clink of fine china, the subtle resonance of the string quartet, formed a backdrop to her carefully orchestrated presence, each detail underscoring the deliberate, elegant control she now exerted over the unfolding evening. Guests adjusted subconsciously, their attention drawn, and even the staff seemed to recognize the quiet authority she now embodied, the subtle gravitational pull of her accomplishments and poise influencing the flow of the room. Charlotte allowed herself a controlled exhale, the satisfaction of unseen victories and months of careful strategy settling in her chest, each heartbeat steady, each glance calculated, as she poised herself for the moments yet to come, fully aware that the subtle yet unmistakable power she carried would shape the interactions, perceptions, and unspoken tensions of the evening in ways only she could command. Charlotte Emerson felt the subtle tension in the room rise as she approached the central seating area, the warm glow of chandeliers reflecting in her eyes and highlighting the meticulous details of her gown. Each step was deliberate, heels tapping softly against the marble, a rhythm that seemed to slow time around her as guests instinctively turned to observe the quiet authority she carried. The soft murmur of conversation dimmed to a low hum as her presence drew attention, the polished crystal glasses catching the light in a way that framed her like a figure of calm power. Ethan Caldwell's eyes followed her with a flicker of unease, a faint crease in his brow betraying the surprise and recognition that Charlotte commanded effortlessly, while Vivian Leroux's confident smile faltered for the briefest of moments, the subtle shift in her posture revealing her awareness of the unspoken influence Charlotte exuded. The air seemed charged, the mingling scents of fresh orchids, polished wood, and soft champagne rising around Charlotte as she navigated the space, each movement a careful blend of grace and authority. Guests offered polite nods and fleeting smiles, whispers of acknowledgement carrying the weight of recognition for her achievements and the quiet power she now embodied. Charlotte's gaze swept the room with precision, noting each expression, each subtle gesture, each adjustment of posture as social dynamics responded to her presence without a single word being spoken. The soft strains of the string quartet rose in tempo, echoing the increasing anticipation in the room as Charlotte's steady pace carried her through the crowd, the polished marble floor beneath her reflecting both the light and the unwavering composure in her stride. She allowed herself a controlled breath, the quiet confidence radiating from her matching the rhythm of the music, while the undercurrent of curiosity and admiration among the guests thickened the atmosphere with unspoken tension. Every movement, every tilt of her chin, every subtle shift of her shoulders projected authority and self-possession, the embodiment of the months she had spent rebuilding her life, establishing her influence, and claiming her place among the social elite. Charlotte paused for just a heartbeat near the center of the room, letting the soft glance of recognition from an influential patron brush past her, a silent nod to the respect and acknowledgement she had earned without declaration. Ethan's gaze lingered, tension and realization mingling in his eyes, while Vivian's composure subtly weakened as the room began to recognize the depth of Charlotte's presence and the weight of her unspoken accomplishments. The ambient music, the faint clinking of glasses, and the soft murmur of voices formed a symphony of sensory detail, centering on Charlotte as the unspoken pivot of the evening, a quiet force whose influence had begun to reshape the social landscape with each careful, deliberate step she took, leaving everyone present aware that the unfolding moments of the gala would be defined by her commanding yet composed presence and the promise of revelations that had yet to emerge. Charlotte Emerson finally reached the broad expanse of the ballroom center, where the golden glow of chandeliers pooled like liquid light across the polished marble floors, illuminating the soft shimmer of her gown and the poised elegance she exuded. Every eye subtly turned toward her, a gentle, almost imperceptible ripple of attention flowing through the crowd as whispers and glances conveyed recognition of the authority and refinement she carried without a single word spoken. Ethan Caldwell's expression betrayed a flicker of tension, his confident composure momentarily cracked as he observed the transformation of the woman he had once underestimated, while Vivian Leroux's radiant posture shifted, a subtle sign of unease as she realized the magnitude of Charlotte's presence and the quiet power she now embodied. Charlotte allowed herself a controlled breath, the mingling scents of fresh orchids, polished wood, and effervescent champagne grounding her as she navigated the crowd with calculated grace. Her steps were precise, each heel click marking a rhythm that commanded attention without overt display, her gaze sweeping the room with meticulous awareness of social dynamics and the subtle currents of observation among the guests. She exchanged courteous nods and faint smiles, each movement reinforcing the silent message of accomplishment, resilience, and influence she had cultivated over months of careful planning and quiet triumphs. The soft strains of a string quartet filled the air, punctuating the ambient chatter and faint clinking of crystal with a melody that mirrored the deliberate cadence of her approach, creating a symphony of sensory awareness that centered the room upon her. Charlotte's eyes flickered briefly to Ethan once more, registering the subtle tension in his shoulders, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his gaze as he acknowledged the shift in the balance of the evening, while Vivian's once assured smile tightened slightly, revealing the quiet impact of Charlotte's arrival. As she reached the midpoint of the ballroom, she allowed herself a brief pause, tilting her chin slightly and letting her posture convey confidence and composure, her quiet authority radiating outward and drawing attention and recognition without a single word. Guests instinctively adjusted, whispering among themselves, the social tide subtly realigned to accommodate her presence, each glance, each small gesture carrying acknowledgement of the influence and control she now commanded. Charlotte's mind traced the journey that had brought her here, the months of careful preparation, the cultivation of partnerships, the reclaiming of personal power and independence, all of which converged in this poised, deliberate entrance. The room seemed to breathe around her, every element, the soft lighting, the gentle music, the muted murmur of conversations, and the attentive gazes of the guests, melding into a dynamic tableau that reflected her unspoken command. Charlotte Emerson's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, an unspoken assertion of accomplishment and self-possession that resonated through the space, leaving every observer aware that the evening's narrative had shifted irrevocably and that the moments yet to come would reveal the full measure of her quietly formidable presence. Charlotte Emerson's presence at the center of the ballroom shifted the energy in subtle but unmistakable ways, the golden chandeliers casting a halo around her as she allowed a deliberate, controlled smile to curve across her lips. Every guest sensed the change, the quiet authority she carried that was palpable even without a word spoken. Her eyes swept over Ethan Caldwell once more, registering the slight narrowing of his gaze and the almost imperceptible tension in his posture, a recognition that he was no longer in control of the narrative, and that the woman he had underestimated now commanded the space with composed confidence. Vivian Leroux's posture remained poised but rigid, a subtle acknowledgement that Charlotte's unspoken power was a force that could not be ignored. The soft hum of conversation, the gentle clinking of crystal glasses, and the melody of the string quartet created a backdrop that both amplified and softened the impact of Charlotte's presence, framing her as a figure of unshakable poise and carefully cultivated influence. She allowed her gaze to drift across the room, noting the subtle shifts of social dynamics, the whispers, the brief glances exchanged by guests who instinctively recalibrated their awareness around her. Charlotte's mind traced the months of quiet preparation, the careful steps taken to regain independence, cultivate influence, and create the circumstances that allowed her return to resonate with such understated force. Each movement, every step and tilt of her head, projected a blend of elegance, authority, and subtle challenge, a visible reflection of her inner resolve and the unspoken victories she had achieved. The air seemed to bend slightly around her, the attention and curiosity of all present drawn to her cadence, the rhythm of her walk harmonizing with the soft strains of music, the gentle flicker of candlelight, and the subtle rustle of silk gowns around her. Charlotte paused briefly, letting the room absorb the gravity of her presence, her eyes locking with Ethan's for a moment long enough to convey the quiet triumph she embodied. The balance of power irrevocably shifted in her favor. The atmosphere became taut with anticipation, every guest sensing that the unfolding moments would carry significance beyond the social niceties of the evening, that the poised, confident woman at the center of the ballroom was now the unspoken pivot around which the night's events would revolve. Charlotte's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, a gesture that communicated victory, composure, and an unshakable self-possession, leaving Ethan and Vivian, as well as the quietly observing guests, to register the transformation she had undergone, the authority she now held, and the promise that the next movements of the evening would reveal the full measure of her carefully orchestrated return. Charlotte Emerson allowed herself a subtle, controlled smile as she lingered near the center of the ballroom, the golden light of chandeliers cascading over her and highlighting the exquisite detail of her gown. The soft hum of conversation, the gentle clinking of crystal, and the steady rhythm of the string quartet provided a delicate backdrop, yet every movement and glance in the room seemed subtly drawn toward her, as if the atmosphere itself acknowledged her authority and poise. Ethan Caldwell's eyes followed her with a mixture of disbelief and tension, the confident composure he had once taken for granted now tempered by the realization that the woman before him had transformed into someone both formidable and elegant. Vivian Leroux's radiant demeanor faltered ever so slightly, the slightest shift in her posture signaling awareness of the quiet power Charlotte emanated. Charlotte's gaze swept methodically across the room, taking note of whispered conversations, the exchange of fleeting glances, and the small, but significant gestures of acknowledgement from influential guests, each detail reinforcing the presence she now commanded. She moved with precision, each step measured and deliberate, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble as she navigated through the crowd, every motion a careful balance of grace and authority. The mingled sense of fresh orchids, polished wood, and champagne enveloped her, grounding her in the moment and reinforcing the calm composure she projected effortlessly. Her eyes met Ethan's again, the silent communication of her regained confidence and unspoken victories cutting through the social fabric of the evening, while Vivian's attention subtly shifted, revealing the recognition of Charlotte's undeniable influence. As she paused briefly near the grand staircase, Charlotte allowed herself a controlled breath, her presence commanding without words, radiating accomplishment, resilience, and refined elegance. Guests instinctively adjusted, whispers rippling softly as her aura of quiet authority reshaped the social dynamics, their focus subtly aligning with her movements and demeanor. Every gesture, tilt of her head, and composed expression reflected months of preparation and careful strategy, the silent assertion of her reclaimed autonomy and social standing leaving a palpable effect on all who observed. Charlotte's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, a subtle but powerful acknowledgement of the triumphs that had led her here and the promise of moments yet to unfold, leaving Ethan, Vivian, and the assembled guests with an acute awareness that the evening had irrevocably shifted and that Charlotte Emerson's poised, commanding presence was now the defining force of the room. Charlotte Emerson stood at the pinnacle of the ballroom, the golden light of the chandeliers pooling around her like a halo, each crystal catching the illumination and scattering tiny prisms of color across the polished marble floors. The soft hum of the string quartet wove through the gentle murmurs of the guests, now almost entirely focused on her, the room adjusting in subtle but undeniable ways to her presence. Ethan Caldwell's eyes met hers briefly, a flash of disbelief and realization passing across his features as he recognized the transformation she had undergone and the quiet authority she now wielded. Vivian Leroux's confident posture faltered slightly, a subtle tightening of her shoulders revealing that she understood the shift in influence and attention. Charlotte's movements were fluid, deliberate, and graceful, each step measured and purposeful, her heels clicking against the floor in a rhythm that drew the eyes of everyone around her without a single word being spoken. She allowed her gaze to sweep across the room, noting every whispered comment, every fleeting glance, every subtle shift in posture, cataloging each as evidence of the subtle recalibration of the social dynamics she had orchestrated with quiet precision. The mingled scents of orchids, polished wood, and the effervescence of champagne surrounded her, grounding her and amplifying the sense of calm authority she projected. As she paused near the center of the ballroom, her eyes met Ethan's again, a brief, intense connection that communicated both acknowledgement and a quiet reminder of the power she now held. Guests instinctively oriented themselves to her movements, the murmurs of admiration and subtle curiosity rippling through the crowd like a gentle wave, further amplifying the silent gravity of her presence. Charlotte's lips curved into a small, knowing smile, the expression measured yet commanding, projecting an unspoken confidence and satisfaction born from months of preparation, strategic decisions, and personal victories. She allowed herself a controlled breath, her posture poised and elegant, radiating self-possession that reshaped the atmosphere of the room entirely. Every detail, from the sway of her gown to the tilt of her chin and the calm steadiness of her gaze, reinforced the realization among the guests that she was no longer merely a participant in the evening, but the focal point of authority, influence, and quiet triumph. The room, with its polished floors, sparkling crystal, and ambient music, seemed to fold around her, each element accentuating the careful choreography of her return. In the brief, suspended moments as she moved among the observers, Charlotte Emerson embodied the culmination of resilience, strategy, and elegance, leaving Ethan, Vivian, and every guest aware that the narrative of the evening had irrevocably shifted and that her quiet yet undeniable victory would define the unfolding story of the gala.